Hey guys, thanks for clicking on this. This is Engineer Your Supply Chain. I'm Jim Moran, Supply Chain Expert, NPI Expert. Today I want to talk about the 5 ways the U.S. election results for 2024 will change your supply chain. So regardless of which way you voted, the the most recent USA presidential election results kind of signal pivotal changes for economic policies. And so what we have to do is understand how they're going to impact American producers and manufacturers, and what does this mean to you, an operations and supply chain exec? How is this going to affect your supply chain? What does this mean for the coming year, right? And here I'm going to assume that the campaign promises are actualized, and if put into effect, these are the top 5 ways that your supply chain will change, how they're going to impact you, what to do about it. Okay, so let's start it off with the first one is, I think, the biggest one. It's the tariff increase from about 28% to around 60%, up to 100%, depending on the commodity. I was just talking to a supply chain VP for a Fortune 100 company just yesterday, and we were comparing notes, and she was not excited about the upcoming tariff increases. We remember 2020 when the first set of tariffs went through, and a 30% increase on electronics and metals and plastics went through, and the kind of challenges that did to the supply chain. Nobody really understood how to what to do with those added costs, right? You have your material costs, and then now you have another 30% on top. Well, most people just applied that to the total selling price of the product. They just added 30%, right? And so it's just a straight line. But if you don't want to do that, or you don't want to do that again, one thing you can do is just kind of audit your supply chain and identify areas where increased costs are going to occur. And then you can figure out, how to duplicate sourcing, reshore the products, near source your critical components, right? Start with the big hitters. Just look at the main critical ones. Perhaps it's electronics that are bringing about the highest tariff increases. So start there. How can you bring them more local? There's plenty in the Mexican, Latin American area that are now really getting better at electronics, at plastics, at tooling, right? Their tooling industry is still kind of getting its legs, getting stronger. And I know a few excellent suppliers out there, but they're really hard to find. So just get a hold of me sometime if you want to discuss about any kind of suppliers. I'll help you game plan those. Okay, so that's one thing, is the tariffs. The second one is regulatory changes. In terms of a reduction in regulations, how they could lower compliance costs, right? Think about when you're developing a product, right? You got to test for NSF, IAPMO, UL, whatever, just to get compliant and get into the market. It could also be reduced regulations on what's needed in terms of your operators and hiring practices and those kind of things. So the kind of impact is you could really improve your speed to market and make development less expensive. But if you're not careful, it could really increase your quality issues and your safety issues, right? So I want you to be really careful here. Make a company policy that any changes to regulatory testing for the product or requirements to operator safety don't negatively affect your operators or your product, right? Any gains made in the early market entry or any gains in your development costs are going to be wiped out with one product recall or one workplace injury. So really have your QA team be vigilant in maintaining quality standards. So don't just eliminate it because you don't have to do it anymore. Make sure you review and say, do we still need this? Remember, customers always appreciate when you go above and beyond. Same thing with your supply chain. Make sure that they are not just cutting out regulatory standards, not cutting testing just because they can now, right? There's a reason why those were put in the first place, and there's a reason why they're being removed. So just be mindful of those. Okay, the third thing is U.S. manufacturing focus. I should say an increased U.S. manufacturing focus. Policies promoting domestic manufacturing could really have incentives for companies that shift parts of their supply chain or their production back to the U.S. So how this impacts you is your suppliers. They may be global suppliers. They may have duplicate manufacturing facilities, maybe in Taiwan and in Mexico and in the U.S. And can you bring those? Can you transfer the products, the components to one of those sites to kind of get around tariffs or import costs? Okay, and especially U.S. manufacturing. This also could be an opportunity for to partner with your suppliers to say, if you bring this back to the U.S., there may be certain incentives to bring the production back in, tax incentives, building a facility incentives, those kind of things. Talk to your suppliers about that. Do a cost-benefit analysis on your supply chain to really help pinpoint which suppliers and components to prioritize for any kind of reshoring, right? But here's a tip. It's not as easy as picking up tooling from China and dropping it in a supplier in the U.S. Remember that, right? These are projects that require planning, proper understanding of manufacturing quality, QA documentation. Involve your supply chain engineering team right from the start. Okay, I've done mold transfers where I've seen a mold get picked up from one facility, brought to another, put into a brand new injection molding tool, and then literally as it started opening and closing springs and ball bearings were going, and there was a big coolant leak that just destroyed the whole piece of equipment, right? So you got to make sure you have all your ducks in a row. Might have been a little bit of sabotage there, but anyway, it's not as easy just picking it up and dropping it. Okay. All right. Before we get to the fourth one, I just want to ask you if how big of a headache it is when you have a supply delay in your supply chain. Right? Wouldn't it be cool to be able to have a way to kind of predict, or at least highlight the highest risk components and the weak points in your supply chain? Well, I recently just talked to someone who has developed an AI platform that they're really good at using AI to analyze supply chains and pretty much predict where your major risk is, where your next line down is going to come from which component, right? You can get on this just to do a quick AI risk assessment on your supply chain. Just let me know, and I will get you hooked up for the assessment. Okay, I'll put the link to that AI risk assessment in the notes. Okay. So the fourth one is labor and employment laws. There could be changes to labor policies that could affect the cost and availability of labor in manufacturing sectors. Remember, if more parts are coming back to the U.S., then we're going to need more workers, right? And we've heard for the last 4 or 5 years about how nobody wants to work anymore. But really, it's nobody wants to work for you because, or for the ones that are complaining about nobody wants to work because they're not paying them enough, right? Think about it. If I was going to work for someone else, do the same job or do something more, I would need to get paid more for that as well. I would require them to say, I need more, a higher pay, I need more benefits. Well, same thing's going to happen here, okay? And also, if there are immigration controls put in place, and fewer legal immigrants are coming in, or illegal immigrants are coming in, or they're deporting more of them, that's going to make it more difficult for labor. Really, right? There's just going to be fewer supply of labor. So, labor shortages means increased wages, means increased part costs. And it also means labor shortages means delays to your supply of components. Okay, so what you can do about it, just kind of partner with your critical suppliers to support investments in automation and technology, help them identify opportunities for automation. There are certain places in the U.S. or Latin America where they are actually growing workforces. They have a very helpful and capable workforce. So maybe you can start sourcing out of those areas, right? Another tip is, especially if you in your manufacturing facility, you're struggling to find operators, resources, a workforce, right? Consolidate your sub-assemblies at a supplier with appropriate labor, right? Instead of buying 6 components and assembling them all at your manufacturing site, what I've done in the past is I've identified a supplier who can manage all the subcomponent purchases, and then they can do the assembly. And then they can send it to you with that subassembly. And you'll be surprised how many suppliers out there are eager to add value to their services. And really, it takes a ton of stress off of you and your buyers, your QA, your operators, because guess what? You now have one supplier, one component to worry about, right? They're dealing with everything else. Okay. All right. The fifth thing I want to go over, which might not seem direct, is the kind of currency and economic policies. So, like fiscal policies affecting the U.S. dollar valuation could make importing products maybe a few percent cheaper, but could also make U.S. exports more expensive. This will affect manufacturers who rely on global markets, right? For instance, it could be sub-tier suppliers. How are they sending a lot of components across the border and back? I worked with a supplier who had, I worked with a client who had a supplier component from Iowa. They shipped to Italy for an assembly, a subassembly, and then shipped to Romania for another subassembly, and then shipped back to Nebraska for final assembly. So this part went all the way around the world. Every time it was, they had to do, import fees, and they had to convert from U.S. dollar to euro, and then back again. And it's just a lot of wasted money and effort in that. So what you can do about that is really 2 things: reduce your border crossings of your components, re-engineer your supply chain for efficiency. So look at it overall. What are we trying to do? What do we need? What do we want? What's a smarter way to do this? And the second thing is maybe negotiate pricing contracts during dips in commodity costs. This help you hedge against material and currency fluctuations. So, and hey, if you don't know where to source subcomponents to your foreign suppliers, ask them. These suppliers are always plugged into their domestic economies. I once had a client. I asked them, like, hey, they were out of Mexico, and I said, what's a smarter way to do this? We don't want to keep sending parts across the U.S. border. They said, well, these people next door do the same component, and they're really good. So instead of going from U.S. to Mexico back up, they just purchased from the guy next door. So they went from a lead time of 5 days to 15 minutes because they could just run next door and grab parts, right? So that's one example of a way to kind of simplify your supply chain. So that's it. Those are the 5 things. If you have any questions on these, hey, let me know. Reach out. Yeah, you can find me at jimmoran.net. That's JIMMORAN. You can subscribe here to get more helpful notes. Look me up on LinkedIn. Again, it's Jim Moran, JIMMORAN. And be sure to follow me there. Follow Jim Moran Consultants for other helpful tips. Okay, thanks. Talk to you later.